Rolex has done something big. For its 100th anniversary, they didn't just release a few new watches, they unveiled an entire hidden shadow catalog. There's even a brand new proprietary gold alloy they spent 21 years developing. And now, rivals are panicking. None of these releases appeared on Rolex's website, and today we are talking about 7 of them. 1. The gold Rolex hasn't made since 2005. 21 years. That's how long Rolex went without inventing a new gold. Ever-Rose, the brand's proprietary blush pink rose gold, launched in 2005 specifically because Rolex was tired of every other pink gold on the market, fading and turning brassy within a decade. It worked well enough that half the industry eventually copied the idea with formulas of its own. Then, for 2 decades, nothing. Yellow, white, platinum, Ever-Rose, 4 metals, unchanged. Through recessions, gold price spikes, and a dozen other brands launching flashy new alloys just to get attention, while Rolex sat on its hands and let the 4 it already had keep doing the work. On the 100th anniversary of the Oyster case, the single most important case design in the company's history, Rolex broke that streak. Jubilee Gold, an 18-karat alloy developed and cast entirely in-house, blending what Rolex itself describes as tender yellow, warm gray, and soft pink into a single tone that shifts depending on the light hitting it. Rolex hasn't published the exact formula, and it never does. Ever-Rose's recipe is still a secret 2 decades later, and this one will likely stay locked up just as long, guarded the way a perfume house guards a signature scent, rather than the way most manufacturers treat a spec sheet. Here's where it gets almost absurd. Jubilee Gold exists, as of this year, on exactly one reference, the day-date 40 ref. 228235JG, paired with a light green aventurine dial, a natural stone whose mineral inclusions catch the light like tiny flecks of glitter, and 10 baguette diamond hour markers set directly into the new alloy. It runs on caliber 3255 with a chronergy escapement and a blue parachrome hairspring, priced around $62,000. And it's classified as an exceptional watch, Rolex's term for pieces that don't get open allocation at all. You don't walk into a boutique and ask for one. You get offered one quietly. If a dealer decides your purchase history has earned it, the same way a private bank decides who gets a call about a new fund before it's publicly listed anywhere. Rolex only handed out that exceptional watch label to 2 pieces this entire year, out of 58+ references. This is one of them. The other is a Daytona nobody outside the trade press has spent much time picking apart, because the moment it landed, every camera in the room turned toward that watch instead, and left this one sitting quietly in the corner of the announcement, mentioned once and then never again, footnoted rather than featured, a line item instead of a headline. That imbalance tells you something about how attention actually moves through a release like this one. A steel-adjacent chronograph with a famous racing pedigree was always going to win the room over a dress watch most casual buyers can't tell apart from any other day date at a glance. The gold underneath it, invisible in most photographs, never really had a chance against a dial you can spot from across a room. So, the biggest material innovation Rolex has made in 2 decades launched this year, and almost nobody who follows Rolex news closely enough to know it exists will ever see one in person. That's not a marketing failure. For a piece like this, scarcity isn't a side effect. It's the entire product, built in before a single ounce of gold was ever melted. Compare that rollout to Ever-Rose back in 2005. Ever-Rose launched across multiple models almost immediately and became one of the most recognizable colors in the entire catalog within a few years, showing up on sports watches, dress watches, everything in between, until it stopped reading as a limited flourish and started reading as just another standard option on the price list. Jubilee Gold is doing the opposite on purpose. One watch, one dial, one price tag most people will never get near. If Ever-Rose was Rolex introducing a new color to the world, Jubilee Gold is Rolex reminding the world it doesn't have to. Did you know Rolex invented a brand new gold this year? Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. 2. The Yacht Master wearing a sunset. Picture a dial, the color of a sunset over red clay. Warm and slightly translucent, veined the way only real stone gets veined. No two examples ever quite matching. That's carnelian. And Rolex just put it on a Yacht Master for the first time in the model's entire history. The reference is 126678 SA Jor, a yellow gold Yacht Master 40, paired with a bezel. Rolex is calling Indian corn, a graduated sweep of red, orange, and yellow sapphires that mimics the look of a rainbow bezel without technically being one. The strap is brown oyster flecks, and that detail matters more than it sounds like it should. Rolex has made exactly one other non-black oyster fleck strap in its entire history, on the Giraffe Daytona. This is only the second, ever, across the brand's entire modern catalog. Sit with that case shape for a second, because it's doing more work than it gets credit for. The Yachtmaster line has always been Rolex's sailing watch, built for people who actually needed to read a bezel underwater, not people admiring it under a jeweler's lamp in a quiet showroom. Wrapping that same silhouette in a stone this warm and a bezel this loud is a strange choice on paper. The kind of thing that shouldn't work and somehow does anyway, the way a sports car looks even better, painted a color nobody expected. Picture the actual buyer for a second, because it isn't who you'd assume. This isn't someone buying their first Rolex, or even their fifth. It's someone who already owns the steel sports models everyone recognizes on sight and has started looking for something a boutique clerk couldn't identify from across the room. The whole appeal is that almost nobody else will know what they're looking at, and that's precisely the point of owning it. We get why a watch like this doesn't show up on Rolex's website. It isn't built to be democratic. Dealers are quoting it anywhere between $160,000 and $180,000, depending on who you ask and how badly they think you want it. And it doesn't move through a waitlist at all. Off-catalog pieces like this one get offered, not ordered. You need a relationship with a dealer, a purchase history, and usually both. Nobody publishes exactly how that allocation decision gets made, and that's deliberate. There's no application, no form, no published criteria a buyer could study and prepare for. It comes down to a phone call from someone who already knows you, at a boutique where you've already spent real money, at a moment they decide is right. That opacity isn't a flaw in the system. It is the system, functioning exactly the way it's meant to, filtering by relationship instead of by queue. Rolex has been quietly building this specific niche since 2022. Sport watch cases wearing unrepeatable, hand-cut stone dials, sold through a channel completely separate from the one everybody actually uses. Most people who follow Rolex news closely will never see a piece like this cross a boutique counter, let alone their own wrist. That's not an accident. It's the same instinct that makes the entire off-catalog tier work. Keep the object rare enough, and the story sells itself before the watch ever has to, before a single review or unboxing video ever gets the chance to do that job instead. Would you rather have this, or a steel sports model at retail? Let's move on to the third on this list. 3. The most expensive Rolex nobody's heard of. $355,000. Maybe closer to $379,000, depending on which dealer you ask. Either way, it's reportedly the single most expensive off-catalog Rolex of the entire 2026 release cycle, and it never got so much as a caption on Rolex's own social media, let alone a spot on the brand's official new releases page. To put that number somewhere you can actually feel it, it's more than most people will spend on a house in a lot of the country. On a single watch that Rolex never once mentioned by name in any press material it published this year, let alone in the kind of coverage that made the Pepsi's death or the Rolexium Daytona impossible to avoid for weeks afterward. The watch is a GMT Master 2, reference M126755 EMSA, cast in Everose gold and fitted with a chrysocolla dial, a blue-green mineral that swirls with natural veining. No two dials matching, the same way no two hand-cut stone dials ever really match. It's the first time chrysocolla has shown up on a GMT Master 2 at all. The bezel is set with baguette-cut blue sapphires and green emeralds, and the lugs and crown guards carry their own diamonds on top of that. so that from certain angles, the case reads more like a piece of high jewelry than a travel watch that happens to tell 2 time zones at once. Pieces like this don't get unveiled on a stage the way the rest of the catalog does. There's no press conference, no hands-on video, no line of journalists waiting to photograph it under studio lighting for a launch day gallery. It simply starts surfacing in trade reporting a few days after the main event, mentioned almost in passing by outlets that specialize in tracking exactly this kind of release, while every mainstream headline stays locked on whatever Rolex actually put in the spotlight that week. Stop and actually picture the watch, this replaced in most collectors' imaginations. The GMT Master 2 built its whole reputation on being a tool watch, a pilot's watch, a travel watch, something you could actually wear through customs without a second thought. It's the watch that put Rolex on the wrists of airline crews decades before anyone was calling this kind of thing a status symbol. This version has more in common with a museum case than a flight bag, and that's the real story here, more than the price tag. Rolex took its most utilitarian sports watch and used it as the canvas for the most extravagant thing the brand made all year, almost as if to prove it could do both at once, on the same case, in the same 12 months. Somewhere out there, exactly 1 or 2 of these exist on an actual wrist right now, and the person wearing it almost certainly isn't posting about it. That's the whole point of a piece at this altitude. The watch doesn't need an audience to justify the number on the invoice, and the buyer who paid it was never trying to impress a stranger on the internet in the first place. Guess the price before you read it. Closer or way off. Moving on. 1 record broken. A second, quieter one sits right behind it. 4. The quiet one standing next to it. $253,000 sounds like a lot, until you've just spent the last minute looking at one that costs over $100,000 more. Context does strange things to a number like that. On its own, it's an unimaginable sum for a wristwatch. Sitting next to the Chrysocolla piece, it almost reads like the reasonable option, which says more about how quickly a number can be recalibrated than it does about the watch itself. This is the second stone dial, GMT Master 2 Rolex, quietly released this year, reference 126759 SABL, in white gold with a dial cut from blue quartz. The first time Rolex has used that stone on a modern GMT dial of any kind. Where the Chrysocolla version reads loud and almost theatrical, this one goes the opposite direction entirely. The bezel is set solely in blue sapphires, no mixed stones, no color contrast, just one tone from edge to edge, deepening slightly, depending on the angle it catches the light. Diamonds still cover the lugs and crown guards, because this is still an off-catalog. Rolex and restraint only goes so far, but the overall effect lands closer to icy and monochrome than flashy. The kind of watch that photographs almost boring until someone actually holds it under real light. Here's the part worth sitting with. 2 nearly identical watches, same base reference family, released the same week, priced over $100,000 apart, built for 2 completely different kinds of buyer. One wants a piece that announces itself from across the room, no translation needed. The other wants something that only reveals what it is once someone gets close enough to actually look, once they clock the stone and do the math themselves. Rolex made room for both in the same release cycle. Off-catalog, invisible to the exact same audience either way, sold through the exact same quiet channel to 2 completely different kinds of collector. And that's really the pattern running underneath this entire off-catalog tier, this pair of GMTs included. Rolex isn't guessing at what one type of ultra-high-end buyer wants. It's building for several distinct types at once, in the same release window, none of them advertised to the other, each one convinced they've found the one piece that actually understands them. Loud Chrysocolla or quiet blue quartz? Pick one. Both of those were GMTs. The next one belongs to the president's watch. 5. The stone with a cowboy's name. Wyoming Jade. Not a phrase anyone expected to read on a Rolex reference sheet. And technically, they still can't. It only exists off of one. Say it out loud next to Chrysocolla and Aventurine, and it sounds almost out of place. More like something you'd find in a Western jewelry shop than a Swiss watch boutique, and that contrast is exactly what makes it interesting. Rolex quietly built an off-catalog day date 36 around this specific mineral this year, a deep, mottled green stone mined in the American West, rather than sourced through the usual supply chains that feed Swiss watchmaking. Every dial cut from it is unrepeatable by definition. Two customers ordering what looks like the same watch walk away with two visibly different faces because the stone decides the pattern, not a designer working from a spec sheet in an office in Geneva. Pricing on pieces like this runs from around $62,700 up towards $76,000, depending on the metal it's paired with and on the specific character of the stone itself. Sourcing a stone like this isn't a quick process either. Someone has to find a deposit worth cutting from, extract material clean enough to survive being sliced into something thin enough to sit under a crystal, and then match dozens of individual slabs by eye for color and pattern before a single one ever reaches a case. That's a strange amount of geological patience for a company that also makes a steel submariner by the tens of thousands every single month without blinking. Hold one of these dials at an angle, and the green shifts from something closer to moss to something closer to olive, all inside the same 3 centimeters of stone. There's something almost stubborn about a Swiss company built entirely around consistency, choosing to build a flagship dress watch around a material that guarantees the opposite of consistency. Every other day date in the standard catalog is identical from one unit to the next, down to the micron, the exact same dial reproduced thousands of times over. This one refuses to be. And that refusal on a 100-year anniversary might be the most honest thing Rolex released all year. Proof that even the most disciplined brand in the industry still wants, somewhere underneath all that discipline, to make something that can't be copied, not even by its own factory, not even on purpose. One stone got its own moment. 6 more didn't, and they deserve one too. 6. The other 6. Thulite, Amazonite, Lepidolite, turquoise. Rolex didn't stop at Wyoming jade. It built an entire off-catalog family around natural stone this year, spreading 7 total day-date 36 references across yellow gold, Everose gold, and white gold cases, each one paired with the metal that flatters its particular tone best. Thulite reads pink and slightly translucent, almost like a piece of quartz that wandered into the wrong color family. Amazonite runs a soft blue-green, calm compared to almost everything else on this list, closer to sea glass than gemstone. Lepidolite carries a lavender shimmer from the mica trapped inside it, catching light in a way no lacquer dial ever could, shifting slightly every time the wrist turns. And turquoise closes out the family in a tone that's been part of Rolex's stone vocabulary for years. Proof this tier doesn't only exist for brand new minerals nobody's heard of. Even a familiar stone shows up differently once it's hand-matched, individually graded, and priced like the rest of this list, sitting in a completely different world from anything that would ever cross a standard boutique counter. Line all 7 up next to each other, which almost nobody outside a handful of dealers will ever actually get to do, and the family reads less like a product line and more like a small, private mineral collection that happens to also tell the time. That's a strange thing for a 100-year-old Swiss manufacturer to be doing in its centennial year, quietly running what amounts to a jewelry house's logic through a watchmaker's production line. It's the kind of project that only makes financial sense if the goal was never volume in the first place, only ever presence at the very top of the market. 7 watches, 7 stones. And unless you're already deep enough into this world to have a relationship with a dealer who handles off-catalog allocation, the odds of ever seeing more than 1 or 2 of these in person, on a wrist, in real life, sit close to 0. That's not a gap in coverage. That's the entire design of how this tier is built to work, and it's working exactly as intended, the same way it was designed to a decade before any of these specific stones were ever chosen. Which stone would you actually want? Every stone on that list came from the earth. The next release came from 10 cans of lacquer and a steady hand. 7. The watch that splits the room. 10 colors, 1 dial. Rolex printed its own name in a repeating rainbow pattern across a watch face and dared the internet to have an opinion about it, knowing full well exactly what that opinion would sound like within hours of the reveal. The centerpiece is the Oyster Perpetual 36, reference 126000, priced at $6,750, the same as the standard version with none of the color. Getting there wasn't simple. Each of the 10 hues is applied individually by pad printing in sequence, layer over layer, with the letters ROLEX repeating across the dial in a continuous Jubilee-inspired motif, a callback to the two-tone Jubilee bracelets the brand's been making since the 40s. One misaligned pass, and the whole dial gets scrapped. No exceptions, no fixing it after the fact. No partial credit for 9 colors landing correctly, and one going slightly off register. The same treatment shows up on the 31mm and 41mm cases too, running on calibers with chronergy escapement and up to 70 hours of power reserve depending on the size, with the 31mm variant built on a slightly different movement, offering closer to 55 hours instead. At least one dealer who's tracked every release this year called it, without hesitation, the best thing Rolex made in 2026. Plenty of others will call it a mess, too loud for a brand built on restraint, a little too eager for attention. Both reactions are correct, honestly, because that's exactly what a properly divisive watch is supposed to do. Refuse to let anyone shrug at it and move on. There's no comfortable middle ground with a dial like this. You either want 10 colors marching across your wrist, or you actively don't, and Rolex clearly decided that split reaction was worth having. Waitlist backlash and all. Supply on this one is deliberately tight, despite the accessible price, which is its own kind of interesting decision. Rolex could have made this dial widely available at $6,750 and let it become the fun, loud entry point into the brand for an entirely new type of buyer. Instead, it's tracking toward the exact same multi-year waitlist pressure as the anniversary dials that came before it, proving that scarcity isn't reserved only for the 6-figure pieces on this list. The Oyster Perpetual has spent decades being the entry point, the safe first Rolex. The watch nobody argues about at a dinner table. It's the reference people recommend to a first-time buyer specifically because it doesn't invite debate. For one dial, on one anniversary, Rolex let it argue back, loudly, on purpose, in front of everyone, and then quietly walked away from the argument without ever explaining itself further, leaving the internet to keep fighting about it long after the actual announcement had ended. That one's polarizing on purpose. The next one is quiet by design. 8. The first hour markers of their kind. A first is a rare thing at a company that's been making essentially the same watches since the 50s, refining details in increments most owners never notice. Rolex found one anyway, and buried it inside its most entry-level precious metal line, of all places. The Oyster Perpetual 28 and Oyster Perpetual 34 are now available in solid yellow gold, or Everose gold, starting around $30,000 for the smaller case, and $38,100 for the larger, with diamond set configurations running higher still. The dials span green stone lacquer, turquoise, mother of pearl, and black, each one aimed squarely at a buyer who wants their first serious gold Rolex to feel considered, not just expensive. And on select configurations, the hour markers at 3, 6, and 9 are cut from actual stone rather than painted, printed, or applied metal. That's never happened on an Oyster Perpetual before. In any size, in any material Rolex has used across the model's entire history, going all the way back to the watch's original introduction. It's a small detail on paper, 3 markers out of 12, but it's the kind of small detail that tells you where Rolex actually spent its attention this year. Not on louder complications or bigger cases, but on tiny, expensive, easy-to-miss decisions that only a close, deliberate look would ever reveal. Most people trying it on in a boutique would walk right past it without ever clocking what they were actually looking at, focused instead on the color of the dial or the weight of the gold in their hand. Even a lot of dedicated collectors scrolling past a product photo online would miss it entirely unless someone pointed a finger directly at the 3 o'clock marker and said, "Look closer." Honestly, this might be the release on the whole list that ages the best. Nobody's talking about it right now. Buried under a $300,000 Chrysocolla GMT and a stone dial day-date family with a cowboy's name attached to it. Give it 5 years, and the first stone hour markers Rolex ever made might be the detail collectors actually remember. Long after the price tags on everything louder have been forgotten and folded into the general noise of a very loud release year, the The way small, quiet firsts always seem to outlast the number that made headlines the day they launched. Would you have noticed the stone markers without being told? 9. The upgrade hiding inside every single one of them. None of the 8 watches above would function any differently if you couldn't see them at all, which sounds like a strange thing to say about a collection built on visible extravagance. But it's true. And it's the one piece of this year's release that applies to literally everything else on this list, seen or not, expensive or not, off catalog, or sitting right there on Rolex.com for anyone to order. Every 2026 Rolex movement, from the cheapest steel Oyster Perpetual to the most expensive off-catalog GMT, now ships under a tightened, superlative chronometer standard. Rolex added hundreds of extra checks during manufacturing, focused specifically on magnetic resistance and long-term reliability, stacked on top of the certification the brand already required before a single watch left the factory floor. Nobody photographs a testing protocol. Nobody posts it to a story or a feed. It doesn't show up in a single one of the auction listings or dealer write-ups covering the 8 pieces above. And it never will, because there's nothing to photograph in the first place. No dial, no case, no angle that catches the light. Rolex did 58 plus references worth of work this year and spent maybe a tenth of the announcement talking about the thing that actually touches every single one of those watches equally. Compare that to how much airtime a rainbow bezel gets, or a new gold alloy, or an enamel dial that took over a headline cycle by itself. The standard buried in the fine print doesn't photograph well. It doesn't need to. It's already inside every watch that left the building this year, working the same way whether anyone ever notices it or not. Rolex pulled in over $12 billion in sales the year before this one, more than any other watchmaker on the planet, by a wide margin. A company at that scale didn't need to tighten an internal testing standard nobody outside the industry would ever read about. It did it anyway, quietly. In the same year, it was busy inventing a new gold and pricing a GMT at over $300,000. That's not a company coasting on its reputation. That's a company still sweating details. Nobody's forcing it to sweat. 100 years in, with nothing left to prove to anyone. So, here's the actual thesis of this whole list, if there is one. Rolex spent its 100th year pouring money and attention into things almost nobody will ever see. An internal testing standard, a gold alloy locked behind allocation, stone dials that will only ever sell to a few dozen people worldwide. The Centennial wasn't really about the watches everybody already knows about. It was about proving, quietly, that the brand can still make things this good without needing anyone to watch it happen, and without needing a single one of these 9 pieces to ever trend anywhere, get unboxed on camera, or show up in a single viral post. Which of these 9 would you actually wear if money weren't the issue? Tell me below. If you want more on the releases and your watches, like this video and subscribe.